Idete ten Anatole, idete ten Anatole, idete ten Anatole. Behold the east, the rising of the sun. For it is from this place that life can be seen emerging. It is there you will find salvation. The sun is the great life-giver and sustainer of vitality. It is in large degree to Helios to whom we pray when we seek to draw in the light. We must understand that the sun is not considered an astronomical center, but precisely that border between this realm and the next. Our visible sun is simply a symbol or synthemata of the invisible sun, Apollo, where all the emanated light is harmonized. But as we have mentioned in an earlier video, Apollo and the sun are not simply tokens of illumination and enlightenment, of rationality and harmony, for the sun produces an immense darkness, a darkness that is reflected in the soul like a basin of water revealing the rippling flashes of its rays. The dark intermingles with the light, and at times they are indistinguishable. This mystery of light and dark can be seen reflected in the moon, for it is this feminine and chthonic orb that is illuminated in our night sky by its reflection of the sun's rays. The moon receives from this higher source, but also has access to the depths, and therefore even more of an intimacy to our embodied selves in the sublunar world. But the dark side of Helios can also be reflected in his children, most notably from the famous sorceresses, granddaughters of Helios, Theurgy and Medea. Etymologically, the name Theurgy is derived from kirkos, which initially meant a circling of birds and of wolves, and Carl Karenyi mentions that in Homer it denoted the hawk. Who among us has not seen a hawk circling the sky looking for its prey? Similarly, the sun circles, and at night it disappears beneath the earth to continue its solar path through the underworld. After all, Parmenides and Hesiod share a similar cosmological system whereby the sun is present, along with day, in the house of night, exactly halfway through its circuit. In the Argonautica, Jason and his crew, and having later picked up Medea, must travel to strange and far-distant lands. But they must never find themselves roaming the same place twice. There is something called the Cusiccos incident, which relates the story of how the Argonauts landed on the island of Doliones, ruled by the king Cusiccos. After the king grants them hospitality and a warm welcome, the Argonauts depart, only to be met with a severe storm that in the darkness drives them back unknowingly to the island. Both King Cusiccos and the Argonauts misidentify the other camp, and many Doliones are killed along with the king in the ensuing battle. Quote, "They, the Argonauts, lamented for 3 days and tore out their hair. They raised a mound over the grave, marched round it thrice in armor, performed funeral rites, and celebrated games in honor of the dead man. The mound was to be seen down to later days, and the people of Cusiccus continued to pour libations at it every year. Therefore there is no backward movement along the solar path, no retracing of one's steps. You must first complete the circle, just as the sun must complete its circuit." This darkness that descended upon the two groups of warriors and nearly destroyed them both is a darkness that clouded their perception and therefore their knowledge. But the Sufis identified a more intimate, primordial type of darkness, what they term the black light, or the luminous blackness. It is this conception that highlights the ambiguity of Helios' nature. Nothing seems more contradictory than a blackness that somehow possesses luminosity. But as the mystical experience has shown, it is precisely this black light that is the source of all visible light, because it exists in the very act of seeing. We can find parallels to this black light of the Sufis in Marsilio Ficino's first light, or lux, as opposed to the lumen which is the light that is variable and is dependent on things of this world. The lux, on the other hand, is entirely autonomous and is the source of all other forms of light, but it is characterized by vigorous action and acts as an active agent. In Ficino's De Lumine, he provides a lengthy title to chapter 11, quote, "Light does not become the quality of that which is illuminated, but constitutes the act of that which illuminates." By constituting the act of illumination, Ficino is showing that it is through light itself that we are capable of vision. Similarly, the light of the good can only be grasped indirectly, just as we cannot look directly at the sun. For in the Republic, after the allegory of the cave, Socrates says, "But at any rate, my dream, as it appears to me, is that in the region of the known, the last thing to be seen and hardly seen is the idea of the good." There is an implication in this hesitance in Socrates' words, which highlights the transcendent nature of the good, since it is beyond being, epikena tes ousias. We cannot see it in its entirety, but we can get glimpses or shimmerings of it through the eye that reveal themselves to our vision. And our vision itself murmurs to us as in dreams, with vague contours and outlines that can only intimate and never fully disclose its unmediated fullness. In this sense, Ficino can say, quote, "Nothing is brighter than light, nor God. Nothing is darker." Therefore, blindness is inherent to our discussion of light, because to understand vision is to understand obscurity. Blindness can come about not through a counterposed darkness, like some veil that covers your eyes, but through various degrees and gradations of light, through an excess or superabundance of light. This relation of one intensity of light to another can create darkness depending on the degree of that light's intensity. For this reason, the ancient Greeks could conceive of a lesser light, for example, the light emitted from a candle, that becomes a sort of relativized darkness in comparison to an even more intense bright light, perhaps the illumination of the entire room when the sun emerges from behind a cloud. Furthermore, in Suhrawardian metaphysics, the first intellect in its initial moment of contemplation is pure light, and the product of this contemplation is the second intellect. But there is a byproduct, because the act of contemplation of its essence cannot supply enough power to confer being onto the second intellect. Therefore there is a space, or more accurately, a shadow. And as we descend the chain of hypostases and emanations of light, we find that by the time we arrive at the 10th intellect, all power is completely exhausted, at the same time as the shadow has accumulated and grown darker and more intense. We can see this union of dark and light through the angel of humanity, identified by Suhrawardi as the angel Gabriel, where one wing is of lightness, the other of darkness, and the mixture of the two representing day and night. You get the crimson color of dusk. It is acts of knowledge and true gnosis that increase the light wing and dissipate the dark wing of unconsciousness, allowing the angelic consciousness to slowly rise to the horizon of absolute consciousness. It should be noted that the angelic consciousness is not human consciousness per se, but an intermediary. When we think of the Orient or the East, we imagine a geographical location, but in the mystical tradition of the Sufis, the mystic seeks the Orient, which is precisely the summit of the heavenly North Pole. Allow me to quote Henry Corbin at some length. Quote, "We have already recalled precisely that this cosmic Orient is not to be sought in the East on our maps, but in the polar dimension. In fact, this Orient is the celestial pole, the center of all conceivable orientation. It is to be sought in the direction of the cosmic north, that of the earth of light. The Occident represents the sensory material world, and it is twofold. There is the climate of sublunar terrestrial matter, that of our material earth, subject to generation and dissolution, And there is the climate of celestial matter, that of the spheres, consisting of an etheric substance, diaphanous and incorruptible, but still, however, deriving from the physical. The Orient begins from the climate of the soul, at the celestial pole, at the emerald rock. There the spiritual sun rises for the pilgrim, and this dawn reveals to him the perspective of an entirely new universe, wherein are ranked successively the souls summoned to govern human bodies for a time. In certain alchemical works we see reference to an oriental quicksilver, hudrar guros anatolike. In Olympiodorus states, to the north they assigned the negredo, to the east the albedo, the white substance which is called silver, for Hermes says the white substance is assigned to the east, inasmuch as they, the philosophers, made the beginning of the work equal to the beginning of the day, when the sun rises over the earth. Mark also Apollo, who says, behold, earth is taken for the procedure at dawn. This excerpt is quoted from the commentary on the work Aurora Consurgens, whose authorship is still debated, though at the time C.G. Jung and Jungian analysts like Marie-Louise von Franz attributed it to Thomas Aquinas. Its actual author may have been Ibn Umayl, but it is still uncertain to this day. Let me quote the following passage which situates the dawning of the light within the 4 stages of the alchemical work. Quote, now the title of this book is baptized Aurora Consurgens, the rising dawn, and that for 4 reasons. Firstly, it is called dawn, as one should say the golden hour, for so hath this science an hour with a golden end for them that rightly perform the work. Secondly, the dawn is midway between night and day, shining with 2-fold hues, namely red and yellow. So likewise doth this science beget the colors yellow and red, which are midway between white and black. Thirdly, because at dawn they that labor under all the infirmities of the night are relieved and have rest, and so at the dawn of this science all evil odors and vapors that infect the mind of the laborant fade away and weaken, as the psalm saith, in the evening weeping shall have the place, and in the morning gladness. Fourthly and lastly, the dawn is called the end of the night, and the beginning of the day, or the mother of the sun. And so our dawn at its greatest redness is the end of all darkness and the putting to flight of night, of that long drawn-out winter wherein he who walketh, if he take not heed, shall stumble. For of this indeed it is written, and night to night showeth knowledge, and day to day uttereth speech, and night shall be light as the day in its pleasures. Having quoted this alchemical document at some length, I want to make it clear that what seems to be intimated in this text is precisely the theurgic activity of Photagogia, or drawing in of the light, albeit translated into the color symbolism of the alchemical opus. We will soon explore Iamblichus's and Proclean's incorporation of light into theurgic practice, but for now let us turn to Kirmani's The Book of the Red Hyacinth. Our excerpt from the Aurora Consurgens echoed the 4 colors of the alchemical work in reference to the orienting of the initiate to the rising of the dawn, that is, black, white, yellow, and red. Kirmani identifies these as the primordial sources of color, but in their primordial orientation they represent the descending degrees and gradations of visibility along the lines of the 4 cosmic elements. The correspondences are as follows: red is fire, to yellow, which is air, to water, which is white, and finally to black, which is earth. Let us look a little deeper into the relation between light and color. Helpful in our exploration of the nature of light is Shaykh Mohammed Karim Khan Kirmani's treatise from 1851 entitled The Book of the Red Hyacinth. In it he criticizes the confusion of previous philosophers, beginning from Aristotle, who failed to make a distinction between the existence of color and the manifestation of color. For Kirmani, color encompasses the totality of universes. It is not just this plane of being that contains color, for it is diffused across the hierarchy of beings. And when we ask whether color must be visible to exist, he would reply in the negative, saying that this is fundamentally a confusion between existence and manifestation. For color is always in existence. It is simply in relation to the composite body that determines its intensity or manifestation. Even a room that is pitch black contains colors, but their manifestation is in a state of potentiality, and the room is not devoid of color. Light does not produce color as God produces man. It simply manifests it. In the realm of being, here on earth, as mortals, we are far removed from the immediacy and intensity of light. And so divine agents, whether daimons, angels, gods, or goddesses, must reveal themselves to us through simultaneous acts of veiling and unveiling. This occultation appears to us at times like an absence, but this is not entirely true, for there is nothing in the world of becoming that precludes the presence of the gods. It is simply that our subtle matter, or latifa, must be energized or intensified to the degree that our five senses become open to the obstacles that are impeding our perception of reality, of a clearer apperception of the higher divinities. After all, it is by means of color that light becomes visible, and when color becomes invisible to our eyes, it is an indication that we are approaching a higher principle. The divinities appear invisible, but they are existing on a higher subtle state. According to Proclean, the Theurgist who has reached the highest degree of perception is capable of distinguishing the formless light of the gods. At times, the gods may communicate with us, and this is precisely through their theophanies. We will speak briefly of how the gods manifest according to the Chaldean oracles. We hear Theurgists like Proclean praying outside to Helios 3 times a day, at sunrise, noontime, and sunset, to draw in the rays of light from the sun. In this ritual called the immortalization of the soul, apathanatismos de suches, the two vehicles, the pneumatic and the luminous, are purified and drawn upward in these various aerial, lunar, and solar rays. The role of the Theurgist is to purify and to wait. In everything you do, even in devotional practice, provided your acts are being offered up in the spirit of sacrifice, you are awaiting a response. But you are not alienated from knowledge of the gods. As Gregory Shaw says, before we become self-conscious or think at all, we are enveloped in the gods and have a, quote, innate awareness of them, an innate gnosis. But this receptivity that is so necessary to have established is what Iamblichus would refer to as the chora, which would be the making of a space by which the light of the gods could be received as divine visions, which would also entail providing a seat for the god, or an altar or a temple, all translated from hedra, in which the god or goddess could place themselves. In the act of kenosis, we are withdrawing ourselves and making room for something else to enter, the divine light of the gods. Similarly, in the purification rituals associated with the powers of Apollo, it was necessary for the Theurgist to make him or herself able to receive visions that would be given by the divinities. There is a certain level of fitness, epitediotes, that was necessary for the performance of such a work. And this fitness was required because the soul's vehicle was said to lose its spherical shape as it descended into matter. As fragment 133 of the Oracles states, "Let the priest himself, when first directing the works of fire, be sprinkled with a cold douse of deep roaring seawater." This seawater is the analogical waters from the river of Lethe, which all souls must drink prior to reincarnating into the material world. Echoing a passage from Aurora Consurgens, quote, "And so at the dawn of this science all evil odors and vapors that infect the mind of the laborant fade away and weaken." Proclean's commentary on fragment 196 of the Chaldean Oracle states, "The flood strikes the pneumatic vehicle first and makes it heavier, for that is what receives the impression of stains and odors." The purification combined with waiting and passivity and opening of a receptive space for the divine theophanies does not entail a lack of preparation or absence of self-preservation and defense. For the task of Photagogia has all sorts of perils, as can be gleaned from the Chaldean oracles. An instance of this is how to differentiate between varying degrees of divinity. How is one to know whether a hero or a daemon is entering one's imagination, or Hermes himself? Hecate, a goddess integral to the oracles in particular and to the cosmos on a more universal level, emerges in a theophany fully armed and ready for combat, quote, armed from head to toe. This warrior-like appearance can also be assumed by the Theurgist as a manifestation of her powers, and her weapons as tools for the Theurgist soul and intellect to make combat in order to ascend the divine realm in anagoge against any demonic entities that would seek to stifle this mortal ascent. But this image of Hecate in the attire of a warrior goddess should not be taken as an example of anthropomorphism, some sort of lack of imagination or lack of a sophisticated conception of deity, because in the spirit of divine inspiration, fragment 142 records the goddess as saying, quote, "Bodies have been attached to our self-revealed apparitions for your sakes." As discussed earlier, light that is closest to the highest principles do not possess form or shape. For Proclean, the three types of apparition begin with formless light, which is most intimate to the deities. The mid-level apparitions occur as formed light or fire, and the lowest apparitions are those that are disclosed in human form. To echo Hecate's statement in fragment 142, it is for our sakes that the gods choose to communicate to us in human form, so that we could better understand their intentions. The purpose of this video is not to delve too deeply into the Chaldean oracles. Much has been said regarding the various fragments and their philosophical, theological, and theurgical dimensions. However, we want to amplify Proclean's notion of the luminous vehicle of the soul. In a sense, it was controversial even among Neoplatonists, but it is equally creative and original. Fundamentally, Proclean argues that light is corporeal. In this sense, light is a place, or topos, in that it possesses three-dimensional extension, and for this reason we can speak of the luminous body, or the algoides okema, a term used by Iamblichean. Proclean was deeply concerned with synthesizing incommensurables, asking therefore in what manner is the material connected to the immaterial. For example, what is it that connects the soul with the body? How is corporeality affected and integrated with incorporeality? For this solution, Proclean utilizes what is called the law of mean terms, which was developed by Iamblichean. This is a law in which two dissimilar terms can be brought into relation with one another through an intermediary that encompasses elements of both positions while being restricted to neither of them. Simplicius interrupts his commentary on Aristotle's physics to indulge in a bit of a digression regarding various theories of space and time. He begins by discussing the Aristotelian theory that place itself is reducible to a two-dimensional surface like walls and air. But for Proclean, place or space is a very fine body which precisely coincides with the physical world. This effectively provides us with two bodies that can occupy the same place at the same time. Without getting too much into the reasoning, we can summarize Proclean's conception of space or place as having the following attributes. It is an immovable, immaterial, and indivisible body. Place or space functions in such a way that the four cosmic elements, earth, air, water, fire, are held together and prevented from flying off or dissolving, and thereby maintain their unity. Proclean goes a step further and argues that light itself, being more rarefied than fire, and therefore the simplest of all things in the cosmos, is place itself. Therefore light is place, and light is space. If this were not to be the case, then we'd have the problem of the abyss that lies between the material world and the immaterial worlds, having no attribute in common between the two that can allow for an interaction between them. Proclean manages to synthesize Platonic, Aristotelian, and Chaldean philosophies to create a very nuanced and sophisticated view of the body of light. For instance, he adopts Aristotle's doctrine of natural place, which states, quote, "Every simple body which is in its own proper place either remains stationary or is moved in a circle. For if it moves in an alien manner, either it is no longer in its own place or it is not yet in it." In this sense, place as body moves other bodies that occupy it. It is by this logical interaction that our luminous vehicle can in fact rise to join the luminous vehicle of the world soul in the cosmos. They are of the same substance. Proclean is essentially utilizing Aristotelian physics to describe Theurgic ascent. By incorporating the notion of like meets like, Proclean is suggesting that the same kind of substrate must be found both in the body that is contained as well as the container itself. Let us quote a passage from Simplicius in his exposition on Proclean's theory of light as a body. Quote, So that if of these light is the most simple, for all of the other elements fire is the least corporeal, but light less so than fire, it is clear that place should be light, the purest among all bodies. Accordingly, he says, we should envisage two spheres, the one of light, the other consisting of many bodies equal to each other in bulk. Situate the one about the center and put the other inside it, and you will see the whole universe within place, moving within the immobile light, being itself immobile as a whole, in imitation of place, but having moving parts, in order to be in that way inferior to place. Having said this, he confirms his account from Plato, who says that light, akin to the rainbow, which is mentioned in the Republic, is place, and also from the Chaldean oracles, citing what is said about the soul from the primal sources, giving life from on high to light, fire, ether, and the universes, from fragment 51. Remember that for Proclean, place or space as a body of light is an intermediary between the body and the soul. As Proclean mentions in his commentary on the Cratylus, however, there is a higher subtle dimension of light, a divine light, or fire of the gods. The gods tell us to consider the extended shape of light, for although it is without shape above, it becomes shaped through the procession. As discussed earlier, the gods in their most elevated apparition appear to us as formless light. Simplicius makes another observation that requires some sort of amplification in order for us to determine the place of theophany, where a theurgist encounters the emanation of the light of the gods, and the gods encounter their own presence among each other. Quote, "This is that light which is above the sphere of fire, a monad prior to the triad of the spheres of fire, ether, and matter. This, he says, is what first received the perpetual realms of the gods and what displays the direct visions within itself to those who are worthy. It is in the intelligible intellective triad that the gods first emerge as a true multiplicity, as Edward Butler says. It is this particular order of the cosmos which is characterized by synecheia, or continuity, with the implication that this continuity forms a spatial connection between things and of sustaining or conserving them in a self-reflective or mediating function. Butler also identifies this place as the, quote, agora of the gods, where they express their multifaceted relations to one another. It is also at this realm where number emerges. The parallel to this level in the Chaldean system is the location of the second teletarch, the Sukhokrator, who is responsible for perfecting the ethereal world of celestial bodies and souls, the teletarchs being also responsible for establishing division and differentiation, which facilitates cosmogenesis. Having delved a bit more deeply into the nature of light and color, let us return to Helios and the sun. The visible sun manifests its light in the sensible realm, but its origin resides in the realm above it. It is the symbol of Apollo, as Proclean commentary in fragment 71 states, quote, "For it is this god, Apollo, he who arranges the whole cosmos into a single unity, placing the chorus of the muses around himself, taking pride in the harmony of light, as one of the Theurgists says." For Proclean there are two suns, the visible and the invisible, but earlier Julian the Emperor, who was deeply influenced by the works of Iamblichus, composed a hymn to King Helios, which identified three suns: the intelligible, which is the good, the intellectual, which acts as a mediator between intelligible and material realms, and the visible one. Proclean was also to adopt Chaldean Oracle fragment 58, which, quote, established the solar fire in the place of the heart, the kradeis topo, the center of the universe, the mirror image of the cosmic body, which would center the sun directly in the position of the human heart. This heart also seems to be the place of Iamblichus's notion of the imaginative faculties, the fantasticae dunamis, which are filled with an intense divine light during the practice of Photagogia. Upon illumination of the soul's vehicle, the Theurgist's other sensory impressions are suppressed, and what enters the fantasticae dunamis are images of the gods. This encounter again occurs at the higher levels of being, but for this to take place, a space, like we said before, must be given for the god's light to be received. As Iamblichus says, quote, "In the contemplation of the blessed visions, the soul exchanges one life for another, and exerts a different activity, and considers itself then to be no longer human, and quite rightly so, for often Having abandoned its own life, it has gained, in exchange, the most blessed activity of the gods. For now, and all days hereafter, let us cease our wanderings and give our reverence to Helios and the sun. We will end this video with the last section of Julian's hymn to Helios. Kad dunamin, de herdeien haer athanatoisi teoisin, uk epiton tusion monon, alakai ton euphemion, ton ais tus Deus apodekomenos, eukomai un triton antites prothumias, moitautes eumene genestai, don Basilea, don holon ilion, kai dunai bion agathon, kai teleoteran phronisin kai theon nun apalagen teten aimarmenen ectubiu praotaten en kairo to prosiconti. Anodon teep oton to metatoton kai monon par otto. Malista men aidion aede tutto meson aeton emoi, pebiomenon polas panu kai poliutes periodus.